you'll be right on the elevated people save the 580 year people. I said, it's a no situation. I said, so it's not automatic. I said, so how do you work out the clock?
She's Swedish, she's got really sort of ice cream.
Function? Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, colleagues, we are approaching the end of this conference, not yet. One of the several important things are still to happen, but this is about the last full-fledged panel, if I'm not totally confused. And I'm very happy to have the honor to moderate this panel. And the first one to speak is Oksana Dudko. She made her PhD at the University at Lviv and is going to speak on the presentments of war, the evolution of Ukrainian commemorative and celebrative practices in Lviv before the war, in the 3 years before the war, and I'm glad that we all have now the opportunity to listen to you.
Hello. Okay. First of all, I would like to thank the conference organizers for the opportunity to be here and present in this honorable conference. And before I start my presentation, I would like to make 2 short remarks. In my presentation, I will refer to the city of Lviv, but we should to keep in mind that at least 3 other names of the city were in usage in that time. Lemberg in Yiddish and German, and Lwów in Polish, and Lviv, of course, in Ukraine. The other thing is that in Eastern Galicia at the time, the majority of the countryside population was Ukrainians, but the situation in Lviv and towns were different. Before the war, the largest urban community in Lviv was Polish. Jews were the second largest community with more than 30%, and the Ukrainians were the third one with less than 20% of the population. And in my presentation, it is rather important. Now let me start. A correspondent for the radical Ukraine newspaper, The Public Voice, reported enthusiastically, "I was watching the march from the balcony of one of the hotels. My description won't do justice to the mile-long procession of Sich, Sokol and Plus Scout societies, the shining faces, the participants in bright costumes waving flags. The inspiration drawn from the Ukraine audience was so delightful that I wanted to experience it all over again." At the same time, the other correspondent, this time for the Polish newspaper, Dziennik Polski, or Polish Daily, wrote, "On the entirely Polish territories in the capital city of Galicia, a rally of the Ruthenian, Ukraine, Sokol and Sich societies was held. Unlike similar Polish festivities, which were natural national manifestations, it presented to the eyes of the public as artificial nationalistic demonstrations. The rally described here, the last pre-war Ukraine mass rally held in Lviv on June 28, 1914, marks the centennial of the birth of the great Ukrainian poet Taras Shevchenko. It was only one among a number of commemorative events and festivities characteristic of the political, social and cultural life of Galicia in the cusp of the 20th century. Scholars often point to the Polish, Jewish, and Ukrainian contested narratives that characterized the political life in Lemberg, Lviv, or Lviv, a capital city of Galicia in the beginning of the 20th century. Nevertheless, the internal dynamics of the national movements, which highly influenced on the relations between different national groups, is understudied. In this paper, I analyze the internal interactions between the Ukrainian political groups. The two rallies commemorating a great Ukrainian poet, Taras Shevchenko, for this essay serve as a lens into the complex nature of the Ukrainian national project before the Great War. When looking at the Ukrainian rallies of 1911 and 1914, I especially focus on the internal and external factors leading to the restructuring of the Ukrainian national project. In particular, I pay attention to the organization structure and the context of these commemorative events, as well as organizers and people attending the events. This political views, socio-economic background, age, gender, and education are at the center of my analysis. This will allow me to trace the appearance of new symbols and ways of using of public space in the city, the dissemination of rituals, and finally to comment on how these new approaches shared commemorative landscape in general. In 1911 and 1914, rallies followed quite established tradition of celebrative and commemorative practices in Galicia. Exercises of the sort were popular in 19th century Europe, which is depicted by Eric Hobsbawm as a commemorative age. These practices were incorporated into official rituals. Such commemorations could also have played a potentially important role in the shaping of nations. In Galicia, Eastern Galicia, commemorations were directly related to the promulgation of national issues. Public events were employed as a primary educational and representational tool by both Poles and Ukrainians involved in promoting national projects in Eastern Galicia, a place where loyalties and identities were interwoven, shared, and shaped. Commemorated events often acted as a source of rivalry between various national and social contingents, reflecting the discrete fashions through which each group came to interpret the historical past and control of the public sphere. Furthermore, the events offered an opportunity of self-identification against the imagined other. Commemorative practices included a variety of activities. For example, the erecting of monuments, public readings, the dissemination of literary and musical works in forms accessible to wider audience. Rallies were another form of mass public event. They took shape as enormous paramilitary parades featuring ceremonial matches, public proclamations, and speechmaking, as well as gymnastic, athletics, and various scheduled cultural events. The holding of mass demonstrations and ceremonies as rallies were not a new idea, of course. Rallies had long given shape to mass public activism throughout the Slav Sokol movement. The movement, a popular initiative in the latter half of the 19th century, combined athletic and gymnastic training within a broader framework of patriotic and paramilitary education. Ukrainian rallies were organized by Sokol Batko and Sich Society. The former of the Ukrainian incarnation of the Slav Sokol Society ideal, the latter combined an ideology similar to that of Sokol with the Cossacks tradition. The Ukrainian rallies, or Krajovi Zdvigi in Ukraine, of 1911 and 1914 solidly established a new commemorative practice. This marks the first attempts at employing the rally format in a national-wide commemoration of a significant personage to the benefit of the Ukrainian movement, in this case, the revered Ukrainian poet Taras Shevchenko. Apart from the 19th century figure of poet and prophet, these practices revoke the stories of the past, in particular focusing on the stories and symbols connected with the Cossacks. Chiefly the atmosphere of social and political tension in Europe at the time, Bosnian crisis and the two Balkan Wars, provided both the impetus behind the transformation of the Shevchenko centennial celebration into a paramilitary parade, and the key to spread the paramilitarism and the establishment of corresponding organizations. These geopolitical events complicated relations between the Austro-Hungarian and Russian empires, stirring up rumors of common war in which Galicia would certainly find itself embroiled in a military campaign. This was plans and preparations promoted founding of a number of paramilitary organizations among Ukraine and Poles. As the official political strategy of Ukrainian parties remains the same, which was loyal to the Habsburg authorities, the discussions on Shevchenko commemoration illustrated the radicalization in the political views of Ukrainian political milieux. Thus, the most appropriate form of the Shevchenko commemoration provided for the lively debate in both Ukrainian public and political circles during the lead-up to the rallies, and resulted in a marked departure from the previously accepted commemorative paradigm, early defined by cultural and educational programming. Gradual and persistent activism resulted in burgeoning influence on the new generation of radicals in Galicia who, in updated debates with the views of the Shevchenko anniversary. The first regional gymnastic rally of 1911 was initiated by the Sokol Batько Society, the vast majority of which consisted of National Democratic Party members, the most influential Ukrainian party in Eastern Galicia. Planning for the commemorations demonstrated an existing tensions between the cultural and the military visions of the Ukrainian nation. Preparation for the 1911 rally began with 9 months in advance with a meeting in Lviv on December 25, 1910, bringing together representatives of different Sokol branches to discuss rally principles. The leaders of Sokol Batько Society, who were those of National Democratic Party, took neutral position, trying to combine paramilitary march with the cultural program. Their main aim was to represent the organizational strength and mass character of Ukrainian movement and use it as an instrument of political pressure in Ukrainian-Polish argument. The organizers tried to involve representatives of different political parties and public organizations. Their other goal was to bring into Lviv a large number of Ukrainian peasants from different parts of Eastern Galicia for participation in commemorations. Rally organizers readily found consensus with the Greek Catholic clergy. The clergy lobbied the idea of placing the religious ritual at the very center of the rally, which would promote the importance of the Greek Catholic Church and of religion in the Ukrainian society and Galicia politics. On the other hand, Sokol Society started negotiations with Sich Society, a large, separate, radical rural gymnastics organization, headed by an influential political leader of the Radical Party, Kyrylo Trylovsky. Sich societies and the Radical Party were the main ideological opposition to the Galician clergy. They struggled against the clergy for the influence over the Ukrainian peasantry. The radicals claimed that the clergy was too conservative and passive and without a fundamental grasp of the needs of the Galician peasantry. The radicals saw this rally as a mass paramilitary demonstration which could broaden a repertoire of political pressure on the Austrian authorities. Clergy participation in the 1911 rally was the main reason behind the refusal of Sich members to join the rally. In response, the Greek Catholic clergy argued that they were the main organizational power in the Galician countryside, including the activities of Sokol and Sich societies. In the 1911 rally, Sokol wagered on the clergy, still considering their support to be of crucial importance. In the period between the first and second rally, however, the shift in the organizers' ideological priorities occurred. Previously mentioned international tensions between Austro-Hungarian and Russian empires changed priorities for the leaders of the Sokol Society. On the days leading up to the 1914 rally, organizers representing the Sokol Society reluctantly agreed to seek a compromise with the representatives of the Sich Society. By the time of the 1914 rally, the clergy had been expelled from participating in the organization, and the Sokol leadership was free to invite not only Sich groups to join the organizational committee, but also other newly formed paramilitary groups. In the period from 1911 to 1914, radical groups were able to strengthen significantly their position in the Ukraine movement. They managed to secure influential roles in the organizing of the 1914 rally and to dictate their vision of the rally implementation. The subsequent organization of the mass public events in the city and their ongoing inclusion as a central component of the Shevchenko commemorations were subjected to an ideological fracture and a change in the wind for the Ukrainian national movement at large. To sum up, I would like to tell that rallies held in 1911 and 1914 created a new commemorative paradigm for Ukrainian national symbol, the poet Taras Shevchenko. Traditional cultural celebrations, popular at the end of the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century, were replaced by the paramilitary rallies. In the wider perspective, the commemorative shift marked the development of new approaches of the implementation of the Ukrainian national project in the years preceding the outbreak of the Great War. One of the most important consequences was the restructuring of the Ukrainian national movement and the formation of new actors with new priorities and the deployment of radically novel forms of political and social activism. While this shift marked the decline of the political influences of the Greek Catholic clergy, who came under fire for their conservative and even retrograde attitudes, it also marked by the appearance of a young generation of elite claiming to provide a new leadership for the movement. The international situation also played a significant role in the Ukraine context. The Bosnian crisis and the Balkan Wars were instrumental in spreading the concept of military intervention and military struggle. The threat of war between the Austro-Hungary and Russia led to the appearance of a new paramilitary organizations and the formation of a political ethos embarrassing as legitimate military solutions to the questions of the Ukraine statehood. Thank you.
Thank you very much, for introducing us to this interesting and fascinating picture of a city where the escalating effects of Balkan crises led even to paramilitary groups being in the streets of Lviv. This is something I wouldn't have expected before the war. We will discuss all the papers later, but thank you for keeping for the time being. And now I have the honor and the pleasure to pass the word to Robert J. Donia, who doesn't need to be introduced in Sarajevo and probably nowhere else. And he's going to speak about the iconography of an assassin, Gavrilo Princip's first 100 years. So we move from the time before the war to the 100 years after, up to now, I guess. And still, I want to say that it is a great pleasure for all of us to have you here, not the least because of your publications on Bosnia-Herzegovina at the time of the Austro-Hungarian period. And I also wish to thank you on part of the organizers for your being here.
Thank you very much. My topic today is the iconography of an assassin, Gavrilo Princip, from terrorist to celebrity. The original title that I had, Princip's First 100 Years, fell to the wayside when I realized it was really his first 118 years, since he was 18 when the assassination took place. I mainly have some pictures to show you, but the underlying thesis of this story is that Princip became, not only was he an assassin, but he became an icon. And I mean not an icon in the religious sense, but in the more general sense that over time he developed different referents. His presence or visage brought forth different reactions from different people at different times. I'll describe the 5 different interpretations imputed to Princip over the past 100 years. First, terrorist, then Yugoslav national hero, degenerate criminal, revolutionary youth hero, and fifth, and perhaps the most important one in my view, celebrity. Habsburg officials vilified Princip and his co-conspirators as terrorists, while they honored Francis Ferdinand and Sophie as martyrs of the Habsburg monarchy. This is perhaps the most famous, best known image of Princip at his trial. looking scared, but solidly without any particular expression. And let's just say he probably isn't the world's most handsome young man. He's got this sort of deer in the headlights look, and appears to be very unselfconscious, to me anyway, as I look at him in this representation. After the assassination, the Emperor Francis Joseph sponsored a grandiose but gloomy memorial project. He proposed the imperial household proposed an immense, cavernous memorial Catholic church, apparently to be located beside the Milyatska River at the assassination site, much like the Church of the Savior Unspilled Blood was built in St. Petersburg, Russia, at the site of Tsar Alexander II's assassination in March 1881. With heavy Romanesque designs and brooding interior, the proposed church seemed to mourn the monarchy's impending demise, in addition to memorializing Francis Ferdinand and Sophie in sculptures, with each one of them kneeling before an altar. These sculptures then to be put into the church. The imperially sponsored structure was mercifully never built. It remained only a few sketches and images in a diminutive yellowing pamphlet that found its way into the library of the Zamalski Museum, where our late friend Kemo Bakarsic found it about a decade ago, and started sharing these images with various scholars of the phenomenon. Not until the third anniversary of the killings on June 28, 1917, did officials erect a monument across the street from the assassination site. The monument was, of course, a religious one, but had a secular appearance. It was torn down in the early months of Royal Yugoslavia. Indeed, one of the remarkable things about these memorials is how quickly they are dismantled or removed when a new regime comes in. The dedication ceremony in 1917 was presided over by Catholic clergymen. After the war and the formation of the Kingdom of the Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes on December 1, 1918, Princip was portrayed as a Yugoslav national hero. He had, in the popular imagination, fired the first shots in a war that had ended in the formation of Royal Yugoslavia. At the site of the assassination, officials placed a plaque that read in Cyrillic, "On this historic place, Gavrilo Princip pronounced in favor of freedom on June 14/28, 1914. Now, there's a couple things going on here that I think are worth noting. One is that it was in Cyrillic, which is something of a gesture to suggest that he was indeed a Serb national hero. And the other, that the reference to the 14/28, reference to the old calendar, probably would lead one to lean in the same direction, that he also had a distinct Serbian character as a hero. Princip's post-assassination utterances and writings suggest that he was both a Serb nationalist and a believer in Yugoslavia, but that his fundamental loyalty was to Serb nationalist ideals. In two written statements and conversations from prison in 1916, he suggested that his commitment to Yugoslavism derived from his intense Serb nationalism. He saw Yugoslavia as the means by which the Serb national ends were to be achieved. Early in their rule, the officials of Royal Yugoslavia received permission from the new government of Czechoslovakia to exhume and transport the remains of Princip and other conspirators to Sarajevo for reburial in the Serbian Orthodox cemetery Vrhbanja. In the 1930s, however, We've actually had several people, I think, refer to this today. The officials built a small chapel in the graveyard at Kosovo, and in 1939, quietly, that is, without any public notification, transferred some mixed remains of the various conspirators to the church. And the plaque that is, or the stone engraving there is very interesting. It's also, of course, in Cyrillic. And as a part of a Serbian Orthodox church or religious institution, it actually lists more than just the 8 conspirators, but distinctly omits one, and that was Mehmed Basic, a Muslim. So this kind of points out, I think, the limitations of a religious monuments to honor participants in a secular deed. At the same time, when Nazis entered Sarajevo, or the German forces entered Sarajevo on April 17, 1941, German troops immediately removed the memorial plaque and sent it to Hitler in Berlin on April 20 as a present on his 52nd birthday. Again, immediate destruction of this monument and sending it to Germany. The only thing that the new incoming troops gave as much attention to was the destruction of the Jewish synagogues in Sarajevo, which they did immediately upon entering the city. After liberating Sarajevo on April 6, 1945, the victorious partisans and youth organizations made Princip a hero of youthful anti-fascism. They erected a new plaque to replace the one sent to Hitler with the text, as a sign of everlasting thanks to Gavrilo Princip and his colleagues, fighters against German conquest. The youth of Bosnia and Herzegovina dedicate this plaque, Sarajevo, May 7, 1945. So he emerges here as a liberator and a fighter against Germans, and also a youthful hero. No mention here of communism or socialism or even Yugoslavism. Neither youthful anti-fascism nor specifically anti-German language, however, stood the test of time. In 1953, that is 5 years after the Tito break with Stalin, the plaque was replaced with another that broadened Princip's iconic appeal to all Yugoslav peoples and did not mention any specific enemy. The picture of the plaque being viewed by Hitler. It read, "From this place on June 28, 1914, Gavrilo Princip proclaimed with his shots a popular protest against tyranny and for our people's, plural, centuries-long struggle for freedom." Again in Cyrillic, and footprints were, depressions were placed on the sidewalk in front of the plaque. This tourist standing in the footsteps evidently decided that the assassination was done with a semi-automatic weapon and repeated firing. This is one instance of people giving their own interpretation to events and in a sense making this very much their own event. In the last 2 decades of socialism, Princip's former iconic political persona were surpassed and overwhelmed by his statue as a celebrity, an icon of popular culture. Short of the complete collapse of global capitalism, Princip is likely to henceforth be first and foremost a global celebrity, even if he also evokes less significant political or national associations as a terrorist or national hero. I must first explain what I mean by celebrity, and note that it has a specific meaning in literature on the topic. A celebrity is a phenomenon of global capitalism. He or she relies upon global economic integration, mass marketing campaigns, electronic and print media, and readily available, inexpensive travel. What time is it? Okay. Studies of the phenomenon emphasize the celebrity's elevated status, evoking curiosity, awe, and admiration in the rest of us. He or she teases us to, quote, discover the real person beneath the public persona. This is a reason that people come to sites that feature celebrities, stand in their steps, walk in their path, and learn more about them, uncover the true secrets, the deeply buried truth about them, so that we can satisfy our curiosity about them and experience vicariously their monumental deeds. Celebrities are morally and politically indifferent. Whether they are despicable or admirable, we pursue them not because they are good or bad, but because they did something extraordinary, consequential, or have certain physical traits, characteristics, which are unique. The celebrity becomes a Rorschach test, becoming like an inkblot, a complex, ambiguous, and inscrutable being onto whom others project their interpretations and fantasies. Seeking to make Princip a global celebrity, Yugoslav authorities in 1975 supported a motion picture entitled Sarajevski Attentat in Bosnian, and in English, The Day That Shook the World. The cast, costumes, and publicity aimed at a foreign audience seeking entertainment rather than political propaganda. I'm sure you see by now the continuation of this into his status as a tourist attraction. The film promises entertainment, not a political judgment. We are invited to witness a momentous, monstrous event that is also a mystery story, one that we should see if we love foreign intrigue and suspense. So obsessed were the filmmakers with celebrity that they advertised as stars the Canadian-born actor Christopher Plummer as Francis Ferdinand, Austrian-born Maximilian Schell as Jura Sharac, and the Brazilian-born bombshell Florinda Bolkan as Sophie. And are you ready for the third one here? Okay. No mention is made on the cover of the English language VHS of Irfan Mensur, the Bosnian-born actor who played Princip. In the film, Mensur was far from the stern, expressionless Gavrilo Princip who stood trial for killing the heir to the throne in 1914. I think we've had enough of this. He was glamorous, handsome. Somebody said they wanted to go back to that last one? Okay. Confident and attired in a fine suit and bow tie, dressed in short more for an evening at the Oscars than a world-shattering assassination. He cavalierly exchanges best wishes with fellow conspirators and receives their support. He shoots his pistol. We are all with you, Gavrilo. He shoots his pistol with carefully calibrated determination and a sure, suave hand. As for the victims, Sophie loses none of her Brazilian good looks or fashionable hairstyle as she reacts with horror at her husband's graceful passing from the world. All the players in this event are dignified, self-possessed, and unblemished as they change the tide of world history forever. The socialist-era likeness of Princip in the Young Bosnia Museum presented him in a similar manner. Handsome, athletic, coarsely attractive, with curly hair and firm, jutting jaws and penetrating eyes. Today, Francis Ferdinand and Sophie are likewise portrayed in the Young Bosnia Museum as beautiful, fashionable people with expressionless faces but colorful, immaculate attire. They too are celebrities, politically androgynous and ethnically neutral persons who entertain without polarizing. Today's plaque reflects the complete triumph of celebrity over all of Princip's other iconic political personas. On June 28, 2004, officials unveiled a simple, apolitical descriptive panel in English and BCS that said, "From this place on June 28, 1914, Gavrilo Princip assassinated the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Francis Ferdinand, and his wife, Sophie." The new apolitical inscription allowed Princip to resume his career as an inoffensive personality, attractive to just about anyone who wished to come and visit the site, see where he stood, and experience what he did in that very special moment. I have argued that Princip's celebrity status will be indefinitely the most dominant of his iconic reincarnations. I believe we should welcome, rather than scorn, the emergence of the protagonists as apolitical celebrities and focus as well on the horrific war that followed the assassination. I would like to see Bosnians, along with those of us who care about Bosnia and its peoples, memorialize the trio of antagonists by making the assassination site into a memorial for peace, in particular in memory of the millions of victims of the First World War. No place on earth better symbolizes the human cost and futility of war than the north end of the Latin Bridge in Sarajevo. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just one remark: in preparing this conference, we saw his potential to be still politicized in a way, and possibly he's resurfacing like a person like that. But who knows? The next one to speak to us is Denisa Petrova from Berlin, where she's doing her PhD at the Free University on a topic related to her talk. And she's going to speak of Band of Brothers, if that's still the correct title, remembering and forgetting the Romanian campaign 1916-1917 in Bulgaria. So Balkan quarrels which are forgotten, which might be a good tactic, as we have heard.
So, firstly, I would like to thank to the organizers for inviting me in for this wonderful conference, and also to all of you for attending, and not least to the translators for doing the great job all the time, and to the students of the Sarajevo University who support us. Common knowledge passes from memory to history, and from history to mechanism, according to the American philosopher George Santayana. He pointed out that man's memory is no less than the capability to rethink, to reinterpret the past, corresponding to the necessities of today's world. This mechanism of remembering and forgetting is crucial for the change in the nature of remembrance in societies. The aim of my talk today is to situate the cultural, historical and political frames which define the long-lasting process of remembering and forgetting the First World War, particularly the Romanian campaign 1916-17 in Bulgaria from 1916 till today. I will focus on issues around the genesis and the transformation of the historical remembrance of the Romanian campaign in Bulgaria, aiming to answer the following questions. First, which brotherhoods and arms had to last longer in the remembrance in Bulgaria, and which had to be forgotten, and why? How did the mechanism of remembering and forgetting work as far as the controversial political context is concerned? How have Bulgarian historiography, media, literature, war memorials and cemeteries represented the commemoration of the Romanian campaign and of the former Allies and rebels? In the Central Powers campaign against Romania 1916-17, Bulgarian soldiers fought together with German and Turkish forces against Romanian and Russian troops. The Romanian campaign became a victory incomplete for the Central Powers. For the Bulgarians, it began in the first days of September 1916. 3 months later, the Romanian capital was taken. The Third Front was established and existed till 1918. Nevertheless, increasingly open and frequent disagreement within the coalition in the so-called Dobruja question prevented the Allies from making the most of the military success. While Romania, a former rival in the Second Balkan War, 1913, was clearly identified as a cruel and deceitful foe in 1916, the picture of the Russian soldiers as bratushki, as brothers, still existed due to the Russian-Turkish War from 1877-78, which created the Bulgarian national state. On the other hand, the German and the Austro-Hungarian empires were seen at the beginning of the war as the powerful allies to support the Bulgarian national political program of a unified Bulgaria. It was this national program which led to the Bulgarian participation in 4 wars within 4 decades. The Bulgarian-Serbian War, the First Balkan War, the Second Balkan War, and the First World War. With Bulgaria entering the war in October 1915. The struggle involved virtually the whole country and made enormous demands on the Bulgarian people, whether they were involved in the actual fighting or remained on the home front to work and support the war effort. The powers unleashed by modern war resulted in previously unimagined losses. In 1918, Bulgaria had nearly 800 men in military service. And 800,000 men in military service, and that with a population slightly over 4 million. 1/3 of them were killed, missing or wounded. Thousands became prisoners of war for years. For the families of the fallen soldiers, places to grieve and to remember their relatives were highly needed. I will now focus on the Romanian campaign to illustrate how the mechanism of remembering and forgetting worked. In the opening battle of the Central Powers' first offensive of the Romanian campaign, the fortress of Tutucaia, or Tutrakan in Bulgarian, was taken. There are 5 time periods which influenced the remembering or the marginalization of the battle. First, during the war. Second, the interwar period till 1940, when the region of South Dobruja, where Tutucaia is situated, was part of Romania. Third period from 1940 till 1944, when the South Dobruja was returned to Bulgaria. And 4 from 1944 till 1989 in the socialist era. And 5th period after 1989 till today. So the first period during the war, plans for commemoration, the fallen soldiers were already being drawn up during the conflict. After the battle, the local people buried the fallen Bulgarian, Romanian, Turkish and German soldiers in a mass grave, a burial mound called Mount of Brotherhood. The staff of the Bulgarian 4th Infantry Division initiated the setup of a military cemetery and raised funds to commemorate the battle and the fallen soldiers. At annual ceremonies, military parades and church services were held for the dead. The national holiday of the 6th of September, the day Tutucaia was taken, can be seen as a glorification of war, as an inducement to further sacrifice. It was clearly a military ceremony. But it also offered a focus for grief and remembrance. There were different but not always competing narratives of cultural identity concerning both the commemoration of the fallen soldiers and all the war victims amongst the civilians, evident in Bulgaria in the years preceding and following the war. They tended to overlap in the cases where private commemoration rituals were in conformity with the public commemoration organized by the state. As an example, Orthodox Christians commemorate the dead on 4 Soul Saturdays in the year, called Sedushnica. On this day, a memorial service is held. The relatives visit the grave, and ritual meal, a meal of boiled wheat or bread is served to other attendees of the service. The memorial service for the fallen soldiers was held on the first Saturday of November, the so-called Soldiers' Soul Saturday. On this day, military ceremonies were combined with a liturgical service and were attended by local people and grieving relatives. In this way, the states and the military offered places to the population to commemorate their missing family members and, at the same time, agitated for a more patriotic effort. So the next period, from the end of the war till 1940. After the war, the region of Dobruja became a part of Romania, so till 1940 the victims of the Romanian campaign were remembered on anniversaries in the Bulgarian capital city and garrison towns in Bulgaria. Immediately after the war, people generally remembered the conflict and its victims in private circles. The cemetery was the main place around which people united. Gestures of regret or reconciliation were uncommon, as former allies and rivals continued to invoke a rhetoric of sacrifice and duty to justify their reasons for fighting in the first place. Later, during the interwar period, official commemorations of the First World War became common in Bulgaria. For the defeated, commemorative sites were as important as for their former adversaries. Aside from providing a focus for private and collective grief and remembrance, they were also intended to remind the society that the First World War had been fought honorably and with moral purpose. Organizations were founded to support the needs of ex-servicemen and their dependents. The Union of the Reserve Officers, founded 1907, became significantly influential after 1919. Other organizations had to tell the story of the war, like the National Military Museum, opened in Sofia in 1937. War monuments were erected on the initiative of veterans associations or relatives of individuals killed in the conflict. In almost every town and village, a war memorial was built, usually on the main street or on the central square. The memorials were designed to honor the ordinary servicemen and to provide emotional or spiritual relief for survivors and relatives. They often served as a meeting place for commemorative services. Countless servicemen had died without family funerals or with no marked grave, so local memorials served as both familial and national sites of mourning. In historiography, media and literature, the main issues were the ultimate sacrifice made by the Bulgarian soldiers, but also relations with former allies and rivals. Immediately after the war, the question of the German responsibility for the defeat of the Central Powers was raised by many authors. The first publications were strongly affected by the situation within the country, its international relations, as well as the close proximity to the discussed events. The next period, after the Treaty of Craiova, 1940 till 1944. In September 1940, under the terms of the Treaty of Craiova, Romania returned southern Dobruja to Bulgaria. A population exchange was organized. About 60,000 Bulgarians and their families with little financial support were settled in Bulgaria. Despite straitened circumstances, veterans organizations and remembrance committees went ahead with memorial proposals, but particularly in southern Dobruja, these proposals have met with little success. On anniversaries, military parades and also memorial services were held for the local victims of war and the fallen soldiers. The next period is the socialist era 1944 till 1989. The early years of communist rule in Bulgaria were marked by a significant break with the existing practices of scientific research and of remembering. The historic research on the First World War was reduced to the possible minimum, and for a long time the interpretations did not outgrow the cliché definitions of the imperialistic character of the war and the class struggle. The war and political alliance between Bulgaria, Germany, and Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire against Russia had to be forgotten. Apart from that, the priorities were already different. The anti-fascist war, the partisan movement, and the so-called patriotic war from 1945. The victims of the First World War, now called imperialistic, were thus marginalized. War memorials and cemeteries were destroyed or removed and replaced with the memorials of partisans and Bulgarian or foreign communist leaders. The Bulgarian war cemeteries, particularly those in the neighboring countries, were not cared for, and many of them could not be preserved. In the late 80s, as the communist regime tried to fuel and exploit nationalistic aspirations, attempts were made to restore war cemeteries and memorials and make them popular again. In the last period, after 1989 till today, In the first years after the collapse of the communist regime, there were no special interest in restoring and caring of war memorials due to the economic and political crisis in Bulgaria. In the following decades, an increasing number of initiatives focused on the remembrance of the so-called wars for national unity, and particularly on remembering the First World War. In the last 20 years, there has also been a considerable qualitative and quantitative leap in the research of the First World War. Bulgaria's relations with his allies during the war became a subject of interest again. In historiography and media was adopted a more differentiated view of the war and the former rivals and allies. A small number of publications dealt with the social and cultural history of the war, but almost all memory aspects of the war on the Balkans were missing. Memorials to the victims of the war are being visited again and even newly constructed. Remembrance services have been held, which international guests have attended. During the centenary commemoration of the First World War, there are many projects of remembrance being undertaken by villages, organizations and individuals. A wide range of cultural, artistic, historical and scientific projects are to be launched. In research, there is a chance to overcome national perspectives by looking at the losses suffered by the other side, and in this way a chance for attaining a common European form of remembrance. Let me end with the words of the German historian Oliver Jans. I quote, "While public remembrance is likely to remain national segregated, research is already arriving at a transnational view." Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We pass over from Bulgaria to Croatia and Slavonia, and the forms of remembrance to the Jewish victims of the First World War there, a topic of great interest in Jewish studies too in the rest of the former Austria. The one who is going to speak to us is Dr. Ljiljana Dobrovšak from the Institute of Social Sciences Ivo Pilar in Zagreb, and her topic is going to be more exact, monuments of Jewish victims of the Great War, in brackets, in Croatia and Slavonia.
Kao što ste primijetili, dosadašnji govornici su govorili engleski, ja ću nekako završiti ovaj panel hrvatskim jezikom jer je i hrvatski jezik službeni jezik ove konferencije. Evo samo malo da otvorim. Recite, možete mi samo pomoći gdje da ih... Ne znam gdje piše da je... Jel je? Ok. Evo ovako, ja svoju prezentaciju neću čitati, nego ću jednostavno govoriti vam. Prije nego što uopće krenem sa samom temom, nešto ću vam u vrlo kratkim crtama reći o Židovima u Hrvatskoj, znači za vrijeme, znači o položaju tijekom Prvog svjetskog rata. Znači, ako govorimo o nekim brojkama, znači prema popisu 1910. godine na prostoru Kraljevine, Hrvatske i Slavonije bilo je oko 20.000 Židova. Kada govorim prostor Kraljevine, Hrvatske i Slavonije, onda taj prostor uključuje i danas istočni Srijem, ali ne uključuje prostor Dalmacije, Istre i Međimurja. Ako bi uzeli, znači, nekakvu populaciju i sa tih prostora, onda bi to bilo nekakvih 20.500 Židova, znači prije Prvog svjetskog rata. Ja ću se ovdje, naravno, kada ću govoriti, više ću se oslanjati na povijest Židova na prostoru Kraljevine, Hrvatske i Slavonije, jer se uglavnom time i bavim. Znači, Židovi, najveće dvije, kada govorimo o broju općina, prije Prvog svjetskog rata i u stvari do kraja, do početka Drugog svjetskog rata. Znači, kada govorimo o cijelom prostoru Hrvatske, onda možemo govoriti da ih je bilo oko 40, jer u određenim gradovima su bile neke reformirane i neke ortodoksne, a ako govorimo o Kraljevini, Hrvatskoj i Slavoniji, bilo ih je 33. Vidjet ćete, ja u svoje istraživanje nisam uključila sve. Ne znam koliko znate, u Hrvatskoj su 99% bili Aškenazi, samo na prostoru Zemuna su bili sefardske zajednice. Ako me pitate kakvi su bili, znači, vjerske pripadnosti, uglavnom su bili reformirani, dvije zajednice su bile ortodoksne. Već pred kraj, znači već početak Prvog svjetskog rata, to su uglavnom bile sekularizirane zajednice. Naravno, kada je izbio Prvi svjetski rat, Židovi su u Hrvatskoj uglavnom dočekali sa entuzijazmom izbijanje Prvog svjetskog rata i naravno nadali su se da će, kao i svi, naravno, građani monarhije, rat vrlo brzo završiti. Naravno, kako su godine prolazili, njihov, znači, zanos isplasnuo. 1914. u Hrvatskoj je donesen jedan zakon koji je odredio, znači, da sve političke organizacije društva prestanu s radom. Tako su cionistička društva prestala raditi, ujedno isto jedan od razloga je bio i tome što su članovi cionističkih organizacija naravno bili regrutirani i poslani po različitim frontovima. Sve ostale organizacije su, znači, ženske dobrotvorne organizacije, Hevre Kadiše i ovakva neka društva koja su imale znači nekako kulturno usmjerenje, su i dalje nastavila raditi, ali naravno sada su više bila okrenuta prema humanitarnom radu. Politički život općina, znači za vrijeme Prvog svjetskog rata, je zamro, nije su se organizirali, znači, izbori u općinama, sve do jedno tamo 1917. kada se to ponovno počinje buditi. 1917. Gavro Švarc, zagrebački nadrabin, počinje izdaje čak molitvenik, udžbenik za učenje u konfesionalnim židovskim školama. Do 1917. znači sve židovske zajednice u Hrvatskoj uglavnom su bile usmjerene prema humanitarnom radu i svi su bili uključeni u to. Da nije bilo razlike po spolu, da li muško, žensko, supruge uglednih židovskih građana uključivane su bile ne samo u židovske organizacije, znači u prikupljanje pomoći, organiziranje koncerata, nego i u organizacije ostalih vjerskih ili, ako hoćete, narodnosnih skupina, da li to Mađara, da li to Čeha, da li to Slovaka. Tijekom Prvog svjetskog rata istaknule su se u određenim gradovima i neke židovske obitelji. Tako recimo u Zagrebu, kolegica je nedavno prije par dana spominjala obitelj Aleksandar, oni su inače poznati po tome što su organizirali prehranu, dan danas postoji prehrana kao trgovina, ali to je bila organizacija koja je, znači, dijelila hranu. Obitelj Aleksandar se upravo tijekom Prvog svjetskog rata uzdigla, čak je dobila i plemstvo. Recimo u Osijeku je to bila obitelj Špicer. Kada primijetite što je se sve događalo za vrijeme Prvog svjetskog rata u samom Osijeku, rodonačelnik obitelji Hugo Špicer nema društva u koje nije bio uključen. Nema organizacije koju nije pokrenuo. Tako da, uz to, znači, što su bili uključeni u humanitarni rat, bili su naravno uključeni bogatije, naravno, židovske obitelji u konstantno davanje zajmova, znači ratne zajmove. Sada naravno dolazimo do toga, vjerojatno ćete me pitati, koliko je u stvari Židova tijekom Prvog svjetskog rata stradalo u Hrvatskoj. Nažalost, na to vam ne mogu odgovoriti. Jučer je kolega iz Beograda govorio da je u Srbiji stradalo 217 Židova. Ja sam ga pitala da li su to procjene ili da li postoje popisi, jer u Hrvatskoj takvih popisa nema. Kolega mi je rekao da su to uglavnom Židovi, da je to točan broj koji se nalazi napisan na spomeniku i da su to uglavnom Židovi koji su iz Beograda, jer da u Srbiji ovako i onako najveće dvije općine su bile Beogradska i Pančevo. Ja sam vam na početku rekla da je u Hrvatskoj tada bilo 33 općine. Ja, nažalost, radim tu listu, ali evo u ovom momentu vam ne mogu čak ni po nekim procjenama reći koliko je stvarno Židova stradalo. Vjerovatno kad dođe 2018. ću vam možda onda moći reći. Ali upravo to me potaknulo da napravim jedno ovo istraživanje, jer iz matičnih knjiga židovskih općina, iz novinskih oglasa nisam mogla skupiti sve podatke, ali sam naravno ih komparirala sa spomenicima. Pa ćemo evo sad ovo, ne znam da li sam bila dovoljno kratka u ovom uvodu, krenuti sa mojom prezentacijom. Znači, ovo sam već spomenula. U samo istraživanje ovo sam ja uključila 28 židovskih zajednica. Izuzete su one, znači židovske zajednice koje se nalaze u istočnom Srijemu, a danas se naravno nalaze u sklopu Srbije. Zašto sam ih izuzela? Jednostavno zato što na grobljima nisam bila, nisam pronašla spomenike. Ono što je objavljeno, znači neke monografije od tih židovskih općina to ne spominju. Budući nisam vidjela, jednostavno ih nisam željela uključiti u ovo istraživanje. Kako sam ja podijelila, znači nekakva podjela tih spomenika, znači pokazat ću vam nešto što možemo reći da su to memorijalni spomenici ili skupni kenotafi, znači podignuti svim stradalnim vojnicima, znači bez obzira na vjeroispovijest, i to u Zagrebu, Čakovcu i Pakracu. Zatim skupni kenotafi posvećeni stradalim židovima, znači baš direktno, ciljano, koji se nalazi u Križevcima, Koprivnici i Zagrebu. Zatim spomenici stradalim i poginulim židovima koji su umrli nakon ranjavanja, a u vrijeme smrti nalazili su se u mjestu rođenja, jer većina ih je bila sahranjena na mjestu gdje su stradali. I kenotafi, znači jedan prazan grof, to su simbolični spomenici podignuti kao uspomena na pokojnika. Svi ti spomenici su uglavnom podizani u mirnodopsko vrijeme, podizale su ih, znači nema nekakvog jedinstvenog nacrta, podizale su ih općine, pojedinci, društva. Židovima su podizale hevre kadiše, sveta društva kojima je bila svrha posvećivanje i njega bolesnika. Svi spomenici podignuti su nakon 1929. Zagreb, znači Mirogoj, spomenik stradalim vojnicima, samo postavljeno na svim portalima piše 1919. No, to je kriva godina. Počelo se razgovarati o samom spomeniku 1930. 1939. je postavljen, 1940. je predstavljen javnosti, pokazat ću vam ga kasnije. Evo, to je spomenik koji se nalazi na Mirogoju. Spomenik je podignut iznad Kosturnice u kojoj je 3500 osoba sahranjeno. Natpis je postavljen 1994. godine. Vidite da na natpisu piše palim hrvatskim vojnicima u Prvom svjetskom ratu. To je u stvari krivi natpis jer iako je 70% Hrvata, znači u samoj Kosturnici se nalaze i stradali i Mađari i Njemci. Zašto sam uzela njega kao prvog? Zato što je on memorijalan spomenik i vjerovatno među tim Mađarima i Njemcima će se naći i Židovi. Na samom Mirogoju se nalazi naravno i spomenik podignut Židovima. Jedan od takvih memorijalnih je podignut u Čakovcu, znači u dijelu Međimurja, koji je za vrijeme Prvog svjetskog rata bio dio Mađarske. To je spomenik koji je podignut svim stradalnim vojnicima, bez obzira na njihov vjeroispovijest ili narodnost. Podignut je u Perivoju Zrinski, znači podignula ga je državna institucija i to općina Čakovec 1929. Spomenik sadrži 72 imena stradalih. Spomenik je bio 1945. uklonjen, zatim obnovljen i ponovno je postavljen u parku u Čakovcu, ali na drugo mjesto 1994. Evo ovako izgleda spomenik. Ovo su imena i onda ako vidite imena, ako se primjećujete da se naravno među tim imenima nalaze i židovska, kao što su Brandl Mavri, odnosno Brandl Mavro, Deutsch Eugen, Eisenstatter, Hugo. Naravno nisu tu samo Židovi, tu ima i Mađara i Njemaca. Evo tu je, znači, sa druge strane. Zatim, ovo je jedna druga vrsta spomenika, spomenik u Pakracu. On je podignut na katoličkom groblju. Podignut je isto svim stradalima, bez obzira na vjeroispovijest ili narodnost. Zanimljivo je da ga je podignuo pojedinac, i to Lujo Schnendorf, i to on navodi se da ga je podignuo svojim drugovima. Nažalost, ne zna se točno kada je podignut i oštećen je. Evo ovako, znači, na srednjem dijelu katoličkog groblja u Pakracu. Ovo su imena kao što vidite vjerojatno Klein Oskar je židovskog porijekla, ali tu vidite isto kao što sam vam rekla, znači bez obzira na narodnost, znači sa svake strane se nalazi ploča i evo kao što sam rekla spomenik je oštećen. U Zagrebu je spomenik, znači sada dolazimo, govorit ćemo o spomenicima koji su baš podignuti stradalim Židovima. 3 su koja postoje. U Zagrebu je spomenik podignut 1930. godine i to na groblju Mirogoj. Podignula ga je Hevra Kadiša. Na spomeniku se nalaze imena zagrebačkih Židova kao i onih koji su se u trenutku smrti našli u Zagrebu. Sveukupno ih je 49 imena, 23 je onih koji su znači članovi Zagrebačke općine, a 26 je onih koji su se našli u trenutku smrti u Zagrebu. Evo ovo ovako izgleda spomenik koji se nalazi u Zagrebu. Sljedeći spomenik je spomenik u Koprivnici, podignut je 1934. godine, podignula ga je kao i u Zagrebu Hevra Kadiša i to povodom proslave 100-godišnjice društva. Nalazi se usred gradskog groblja u Koprivnici. Na spomeniku se nalaze imena 8 Židova iz Koprivnice i okolnih sela. Godine 1975. spomenik je nešto preinačen i dodano mu je obilježje i za sve stradale Židove u vrijeme fašizma. Fotografija je nažalost loša zato što je to jedina koja je preživjela, znači koja govori iz tog razdoblja. Kao što vidite u donjem dijelu nalaze se i imena. Evo ovako danas izgleda, znači na ovoj ploči jedino je promijenjena godina, znači on sad označava spomenik palima u Svjetskom ratu gdje je dodana naravno i 1945. godina. Treći, znači u tom nizu koja postoje za sada u Hrvatskoj, koja su otkrivena, su spomenik podignut stradalim Židovima u Križevcima, podignula ga je isto Hevra Kadiša. Spomenik je svečano posvećen 1935. na zajedničkom groblju Križevcima i na spomeniku su uklesana imena 6 Židova iz Križevaca. On je vrlo zanimljiv zato što za razliku od svih ovih spomenika navodi mjesto gdje je osoba stradala, kojeg datuma i gdje. On je, evo, ne znam koliko se vidi, ali jedan od rijetkih spomenika, znači gdje su jednostavno potpuni podaci. Evo još na kraju, tu sam kao primjer uzela 2 spomenika koji znači, su podignuta Židovima kao pojedincima. Ovo je jedan spomenik koji govori, nalazi se u Đakovu i podignut je Isi Izadoru Švarcu, rođenom 1891. godine, poginulog 10. rujna 1916. kod Crnog vrha u Srbiji u 24. godini te tamo i sahranjen. Ovo je jedan od rijetkih kenotafa, znači tu on nije sahranjen, ali je obitelj podignula u spomen na njega. Zanimljivo je što se nalazi fotografija i zadnji spomenik u ovoj analizi je spomenik u Osijeku. Podignula ga je obitelj Kraus svojim sinu i cionističkom prvaku Ervinu Krausu, koji je stradao na frontu, ali je umro u Osječkoj bolnici od 1918. godine od španjolske gripe i to je jedan od rijetkih spomenika koji je znači baš podignut Židovima i znači na tom mjestu se nalazi čak i tijelo. I evo, mislim, na kraju ću samo reći, znači kenotaf u Čakovcu podignuo je grad, u Pakracu pojedinac. Od 28 židovskih općina skupni kenotafi podignuti su samo u 3 mjesta, podizale su ih Hevre Kadiše, podignuti su u razdoblju od 1929. do 1939. Na spomenicima posvećenim židovskim vojnicima uz popisa imena stradalih jedino se na Križevačkom navode i okolnosti smrti, znači vrijeme i mjesto, i spomenici u Pakracu, Križevcima i Zagrebu zadržali su svoj prvotni oblik i mjesto postavljanja. Spomenik u Čakovcu je maknut, vraćen i obnovljen i premješten, a na spomeniku u Koprivnici dodana je godina 1945. Hvala.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dobrovšak. So we have heard 4 talks and 4 different ways of remembrance. The first one, a remembrance in preparing for war in a way, even though the people didn't know about it at that time, but that it was really going to come. One other talk with more or less religious-centered remembrance. This is as far as I get. This is at least what I gathered from the pictures, and one very state-centered but forgotten, and one other celebrity which is still at least remembered as a celebrity, which with very broad content, possibly not even serving the remembrance of war anymore. So we are going to enter into discussion. We are at the end of almost at the end of the conference, but still I would like to ask you to introduce you and say your name. And as we are a little bit late, make your questions short. The first one is Ulf Brunbauer, who is introduced by me that way, so please. Even short.
Thank you. I've got a question to Denica. Very interesting presentation, really very new, what you presented. You ended with the quote from Oliver Jans, where he sort of calls from going from the national to the transnational. I would like to turn this from the head on its feet, or from its feet on its head. And I think what we actually need in terms of studying memory in Southeastern Europe are more local studies. And in order to learn how local memories interact with collective memory, because I think this is really the interesting thing in memory studies. Representations that are part of collective memory, it's also important. Of course, and you perfectly showed the political expediency of collective memory. But what I wonder is, how did this interact with communicative memory? Because this, I mean, on the local level, people really had a memory of brothers and fathers and so on who died in the war. And how did their memory relate to these changes in the collective memory when they experienced sometimes fell into complete oblivion? So this must have created some tensions, because when we're talking about memory, we're talking also about emotions, but the emotions, they are locally. They're not produced by collective memory so much, but they are produced by communicative memory. And then a short remark to Liliana Dobovšak. Very interesting, but what did you want to tell us? I really didn't see any sort of analysis or interpretation. We could go probably endlessly and describe monuments, but for what?
So, thank you very much. I can just agree with you on this. So we need, no question, more local studies and more young researchers who are able to present their results in other languages spoken. But yes, it's not a particular topic in my PhD, but I collected data which show me that in some periods, in some certain political contexts, there were a little official place for private memory. I mean, in the first years after the war, in Bulgaria there was government of the Agrarian Party, so they wished not to endanger the diplomatical mission in Neuilly before the Treaty of Versailles, or Neuilly in the Bulgarian case, with military parades or gatherings for the population where soldiers were commemorated. And in 1924, the military purged and overthrew this government. So since then, till the first half of the 40s, we have a little bit, we have a better context for state, but also of private memories. So there are many individual remembrance projects, I can call this where relatives collected money and erected memorials for their relatives. After 1944, it was, as I can remember it in my own family, it was forbidden to speak loud about it. And some military cemeteries were actually destroyed. So the relatives did remember family members in the family circle, and it doesn't. It must not get public. So thank you.
Zahvaljujem profesor Brunbauer na pitanju. Vjerovatno ja vjerovatno ne spadam u ovu sekciju i pretpostavljam da bi bilo bolje da sam u sekciji u kojoj se govorilo o spomenicima. Pitali ste me zašto uopće govorimo o spomenicima na ovakav način. Gledajte, prvo mi čak u Hrvatskoj nemamo nekakav registar i ne znamo koliko uopće postoji spomenika. Mi jednostavno sada prikupljamo podatke. Čak ni židovske zajednice, ne biste vjerovali, ne znaju za te spomenike. Ja sam ih sad eto nekako revitalizirala, znači obnovila sam sjećanje na njih. Mislim da je itekako važno da javnost zna da nije sve apsolutno uništeno u Hrvatskoj, već da su spomenici Židovima uspjeli opstati i ok, oni su možda različiti, ja sam i željela samo pokazati kako postoji različitost u prikazanju, kako to nije bilo, nema nekakve istoznačne forme, kako su oni različiti, ali su preživjeli. I židovske zajednice u Hrvatskoj nemaju sjećanja o Židovima za vrijeme Prvog svjetskog rata. Ovo su jedina sjećanja koja postoje. A mislim da je to dovoljno, bar da im pokažem. I da na taj način sve ove obitelji koje ste sada vidjeli, njihovih potomaka više nema. Ja njima pokazujem hvalu za ono što su učinili za vrijeme Prvog svjetskog rata. Njihovim potomcima ne mogu. Nadam se da sam vam zadovoljila.
Yeah, it's certainly useful to make a documentary record to those things, but one could say so. I've seen three hands, and Dr. Tudor is the next one.
Okay, I have some questions to Denisa Petrova.
Somewhat louder, I guess.
I have some questions to Denisa Petrova, but it's too late. It remains just one question for you. It's very interesting, your presentation, inspiring. My question is, what was more important for the Bulgarian common memory regarding the Romanian campaign in 1916? Remembering Tutukaya, so the victory in a war of revenge, confronting 1913 situation, or the final defeat in 1918 when the territory of South Dobroja is coming back to Romania. So the final reason was to remembering the victory or forgetting the defeat. This is the only question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I can to say that 1916 was clearly the big day of the victory in Tutukaya or Tutarakan, because all the events that followed were overshadowed first by the conflicts within the coalition. I mentioned it was a victory incomplete for the Central Powers because for the Bulgarians there was not much to celebrate after this victory. They were engaged in conflicts with Germany and also Hungary about the, let me say, the resources of the land of Romania. It was not so important. And the next big day, it's the Treaty of Craiova, 1940. But I think I must not explain why. And it was equally celebrated with 1916 and the years to follow till 1944. After 1994, it was not mentioned at all because Romania and Bulgaria were part of the Warsaw Pact. So, thank you.
Just a slight remark. The history of the Dobruja is quite complicated. And if you had shown us a map where it is and when this belonged to Bulgaria and when to Romania shortly, would have been helpful to our understanding, possibly. Sonia Dujmova. So if I know the name, of course, you don't need to stick to my rule.
Sonja Dujmović, Institut za istoriju Sarajeva. Ja sam se prihvatila mikrofona da bi se referirao na referat profesora Donije nekim svojim observacijama koje mislim da bi možda trebali imati svi skupa u vidu, a to je da taj neki podrazumijevajući politički kontekst koji prati svaku vrstu celebritija nije dovoljno naglašen ovom prilikom. Naravno, treba pozdraviti napor profesora da taj vizualni materijal u ovoj mjeri prikupi i prezentira nam. Prva stvar, profesor je tamo rekao da je vrlo brzo su kosti principa dozvoljeno da se prebaci, ali mislim da to spada u onu, kako bi rekao, grubo rečeno, poslijeratnu pospremanje kostiju koje su sve države imale u međusobnim nekim tim ugovorima, ali treba isto tako reći na koji način su te kosti prihvatane. Mislim, ta ceremonija je bila vrlo, vrlo skromna i bez nekih specijalnih manifestacija njih su u stvari prihvatila Sokolska organizacija grada Sarajeva. Znači, i preživjeli Sokoli i treba naglasiti da je to prihvaćeno, da je to u stvari, da su te kosti došli februara 1920. godine, pri čemu je u stvari smrt mladobosanaca, ovih punoljetnih koji su bili ubijeni 15. godine, uzeto kao, znači februaru, jedan, ne znam, svetac pravoslavni uzet kao zaštitnik mladobosanaca, dakle nije uzeto Vidovdan kao zaštitnik Sokolske organizacije koja jest u samom tom početku, u stvari to je samo njen početak ideološke stvari, kako bi rekla, ideološkog pokreta koji je u stvari taj državni dio. Možda nije bilo dovoljno vremena da se ta ideologija troimenog naroda, troimenog plemena kao sad strpa odmah ovome, odnosno da se pridruži ideji i figuri Gavrila Principa. Znači, 20. godine je to vrlo skromno urađeno. Drugo, vrlo je u stvari signifikantno da je tek 1930. godine postavljena ploča Gavrilu Principu, znači punih 12 godina nakon završetka svjetskog rata i znači to je već vrijeme, jel tako, šesnaestnaestske diktature, jugoslovenske ideologije i tako dalje i tu se država pronalazi varijantu da Principa kao neko ko nije samo, znači, ko nije samo Srbin, ko nije nešto još drugo, nego u stvari podržava taj segment njegove ideologije kao Jugoslovena, znači. A inače treba reći da nije baš on bio omiljena tema Gavrilo Princip, jer je u stvari nakon rata više posmatran kao revolucionar, kao neko koji je htio urušiti sistem, pa bio to austrougarski ili sad u Kraljevini, vrlo je to bilo u stvari nestabilno da se na njega država odmah oslaga. I sljedeći stvar, ova spomen kosturnica, ona je, trebamo reći, 39. sagrađena. 39. godina je godina u kojoj već pa ne gotovo sa znači vidio se da se problem gospodinske ideje ne može tako održati, da je tu već sporazum Cvetković-Baček, da tu treba apsolutno biti podjela i mislim da je tu u stvari, pošto je to finansirao jedan sarajevski trgovac, znači privatne su pare, koji je jednostavno vjerovatno osjetio potrebu da se tu nekako neki srpski redovi zbijaju i to je zajednička posudnica. Zašto se tu na toj ploči preskače ta vjerska, kako ste vi naveli, pripadnost i zašto tu nema Muhameda Mehmedbašića? Zato što Muhamed Mehmedbašić nije stradao, nije odmah u prvom valu nakon atentata bio uhapšen, on je preko Crne, on je jedini koji u stvari izbjegao hapšenje u prvom valu, otišao u Crnu Goru, vratio se, kratko bio ispitivan i na kraju formirao porodicu, umro prirodnom smrću. Znači, mislim, možda neko, mislim da u stvari treba biti tu, da to treba primijetiti. Zašto? Ili vjerovatno je čovjek sahranjen po običajima svoje religijske tradicije. I naravno moram kao još jednu primjedbu dati stvar na onu fotografiju glumice. S obzirom da ima određeni broj ženskog svijeta, ovdje mogli ste i nas počastiti nekom fotografijom ljepšom sa Maksimilijanom Šelom, tako da mi isto možemo odmoriti malo oči, jel tako, ne samo muški svijet. I na kraju, naravno, opet da citiram iz istog predavanja, naravno da treba, podržavam to, da trebamo još uvijek biti radoznali, znači ovome stvarno nije sve rečeno, da ne bi neka naredna predavanja bila samo celebrity. Hvala.
I hear several questions there. But I think you've drawn attention to something very important. And that is, I have outlined, with I think one exception, only the changes in the memorial culture that have taken place at the change of regimes. But in fact, that the character of the memorial is dynamic. It's in constant flux. Private persons may provide for various types of ceremonies, and for that matter, groups such as the Sokol societies may take an entirely different interpretation from the official one. So I've certainly greatly simplified the story here, and that's, in a sense, the attractive thing about this type of inquiry. One can find an almost inexhaustible source or a supply of changes and new interpretations that come into the picture over many years.
I have a microphone, just 1 minute. My name is Slobodan Šoja. I am a historian and diplomat from Sarajevo. I prefer to thank Professor Donija for discovering us a special aspect of Brazilian celebrity. My question is very simple. You are not, of course, head of city administration of Sarajevo, but you wrote biography of our city. Do you think that Mlada Bosna should have a street in Sarajevo? Thank you.
I come from a country where most streets are A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, and I think that I really believe that street names should be neutral. They should not carry a political significance for one particular group, even if it's the dominant group in the city. I'll stick with A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3 anytime.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to ask Robert Donija about to which degree did the image of Princip during the socialist period emphasize this socialist dimension of it? I mean, because this is striking. We talked earlier about the kind of the ideological hodgepodge, which was part of his world and of that generation, and to which degree actually was that also a resource? Because I so far didn't get, none of the presentations there was much of a discussion about the socialist side to Princip, or how much that was, in a certain way, tried to be drawn out in the Yugo-socialist Yugoslav period. I onda sam imao neko drugo pitanje vezano sa vašom prezentacijom oko spomenicama. Mislim, ne bih sad hteo da se vratim na pitanje kolega Brunbauera, nego više na pitanje šta to znači ili šta to nama kaže o sećanje o Jevrejima u međuratnoj Jugoslaviji, u smislu kako se vidi jevrejska zajednica u međuratnoj Jugoslaviji, pogotovo kad se identifikuje da neki Jevreji su sad u spomenicama spomenut zato što su bili u vojske Austro-Ugarske i naravno viđenje kao možda neprijatelj te nove države. Kako se ona interpretira uloga i pozicija jevrejska zajednica u Jugoslaviji tada?
Just briefly, I was surprised how little, if any, emphasis there is in his the memorial culture during the period of socialism to socialism and communist revolutionary youth hero, and then Yugoslav. But the socialist/communist side of things seems to get very little emphasis. That may be because there has been from the beginning some effort to make him universally appealing to people beyond the borders of Bosnia or Yugoslavia. And of the many things that you could describe him as that might offend visitors, that might be one of them. But that's just speculation. I kind of wish they had made more emphasis of his socialist side.
Just a slight remark, the Cyrillic plate of 1953 possibly would not go in accordance with your interpretation to make it worldwide receptible, but rather stress, as far as I understood from your presentation also, a Serbian aspect, even at that time, to that kind of remembrance. But that could be left aside. But I just want to join the question in one respect. You said that except for the plate in Mirogoj, all the other memory plates and sites were erected after 1929. And so my question in the line of the first question of Florian Bieber is, how would you explain what did the monarchy dictatorship mean to the position of the Jewish communities in Croatia and Slavonia, and since obviously there seems to be some connection. So maybe it helped them in a way, but this could be explained.
Evo, prvo ću probati odgovoriti profesoru Bibru. Ovako, rekla sam za onaj prvi spomenik je podignut u stvari 39. Krivo je navedena godina, nije 1919. Što se tiče nekakvog slike Židova, znači u međuratnom razdoblju, ako mogu govoriti o Židovima iz Hrvatske, odnosno Židovima Srbije, nema tu nekih velikih razlika. Ne smatraju se Židovi koji su se borili u Austro-Ugrskoj manje vrijedni ili neprijatelji zato što su se borili na strani Austro-Ugrske od recimo Židova koji su se borili za Kraljevinu Srbiju. Spomenici, sad moram priznati, ne znam kada je točno u Beogradu podignut spomenik, ne znam. Znači, ovi spomenici su podignuti povodom nekih obljetnica. Uglavnom, znači, to je bila 1934. Ili, ako je ideja nastala 34. podignuta je 35. Zamaskirana je bila, naravno, da spomenike podiže Hevra Kadiša, da ih negdje se to točno pogodilo, pa je bilo 100 godina od postojanja Hevra Kadiše. Naravno, židovska općina je stajala iza toga. prema onome što vidite u novinama, znači dnevnim, a najviše u Židovu koji izlazi od 1917. do 1941. Moram tu naravno naglasiti, to je bio cionistički list, nećete primijetiti da postoje neke velike razlike. No, 1941. znači kada dolazi na vlast NDH i kada dolazi do raspada Kraljevine Jugoslavije, u početku su znači izuzeti od nošenja židovskog znaka u Srbiji oni Židovi koji su se borili u Prvom Balkanskom i Drugom Balkanskom ratu i u Prvom svjetskom ratu na strani Srbije. Što recimo nije primjer za hrvatske Židove. Ali to je tek tada. U međuratnom razdoblju ćete vrlo teško vidjeti te neke razlike da se tako to nešto potiče. Ja nisam se previše bavila time, ja sam ipak stručnjak za povijest Židova do kraja Prvog svjetskog rata. Ovo što ste me pitali, znači nekakva, rekli ste, diktatura, monarhija, ako sam ja dobro shvatila. Pa ovako, kraljevska diktatura. Pa gledajte ovako, Židovi su, koliko ja znam, koliko se bavim, upravo u monarhiji dobili emancipaciju. Ako mislite na monarhiju, austro-ugarsku monarhiju. Nisam...
In 1929, this seems to have been an important date within your documentary record. You said all of them were erected after that date. So my question goes, in what ways would you explain that the Kraljevska diktatura helped the Jews to commemorate their victims?
Pa 1929. istina donesen u Kraljevini Jugoslaviji zakon jedan koji nije bio donesen samo za Židove, donesen i za sve ostale vjeroispovijesti, znači kojim je proširio ravnopravnost, ali sve ove akcije, mislim, osobno, možda sam u krivu, nisam se toliko bavila, vrlo teško ću vam odgovoriti na to pitanje jer nije moja, znači središte mojeg istraživanja, to su više bile znači akcije pojedinaca, odnosno društva, ne nekakve da je sad država, odnosno utjecala na podizanje tih spomenika i da je nešto stajalo iza toga.
Just one thought on a couple of questions that were directed to me. In 1914, immediately after the assassination, Austro-Hungarian officials encouraged the collection of monies for a fund to put up a memorial. And they actually designated the officers of the committee and collected a lot of money. However, the committee that was assembled proved unable to agree on the nature of the monument. There was a secular wing and there was a religious wing that wanted to approach the thing. I think that probably makes the point that all of these things are contested, some of them for decades before a memorial is actually erected. If you remember the controversy over the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, I thought they were going to put my name on that thing by the time it was done. If you also go to the battlefield at Gettysburg, you'll see that most of the memorials there were put in about 30, 40 years after the Civil War in the United States was over.
I have Gundula Gahl in Berlin. I have a question for Oksana Dudko. You told us about the public Ukrainian rallies before World War I and the shift from a cultural to a paramilitary focus. And could you say something about the Polish celebrating culture in the years before World War I? Were there similarities or was it quite different? Or was there also this shift from a cultural to a paramilitary perspective?
Yes, thank you for your question. It's quite interesting question, and when we are talking about Polish case, I will refer to the work of Professor Dabrowski, which wrote a monograph about the shaping Polish nation and the role of commemorations in it. When we're talking about Polish commemorations, there was a difference between the way Poles and Ukrainians commemorate the events. For example, the biggest pre-war Polish commemorations took place in Krakow, not in Lviv, and it was in 1910, and it was dedicated to the anniversary of the Grunwald battle. It was also held like in more or less similar way, like a paramilitary demonstration. And when we are talking about the organizational form, these two commemorations look quite similar, because we have rally in Polish case, and also we have rally in the Ukrainian case. But the Ukrainian commemorations were different in such way that in case of Ukraine rally of 1914, the Ukrainian Galicians tried to show their Ukraine projects in the streets of Lviv, which was not a Ukraine city. In case of Krakow, was mainly inhabited by Poles. But in case of Ukrainians, it wasn't a Ukraine city in that case, and it was a big difference, because Ukrainians tried to gather all the peasants from the all Eastern Galicia to show their power for not only for the Ukrainians but also for the Poles and to the Austrian authorities, just to depict the importance of the Ukraine case, which wasn't. They tried to show their power, but actually they had no power in Lviv or Lemberg in the times. And also quite one more difference from the Polish commemorations, that by this commemorating of the symbol of Taras Shevchenko, Ukrainians tried to show the unity with the other Ukrainian lands, which was a part of the Russian Empire, because Taras Shevchenko was a national symbol not only for the Galician Ukrainians but more for the Russian Ukrainians, and trying to commemorate the Taras Shevchenko in the Austrian part, it was like a claim to show that the Ukrainian national project in Austria-Hungary also had influence on the Russian lands.
I saw your two questions. I just would like to follow up with one on that subject. As you said in your talk, in the answer, the peasants were brought to the city to depict the possible strength of the Ukrainians in the area of Lviv and Lemberg. And do you have any indication? But the organizers, I guess, were from Lviv. So, do you have any indications for the interactions between those urban organizers and the peasants, and whether the peasants felt like getting into possession of the city themselves too, or was it just the idea of the organizers to depict it like that?
Thank you for your questions. It's quite interesting and challenging one, because as I mentioned, Lviv Lemberg wasn't the Ukrainian city, so the main core of staff of the organizers, they used to work not in Lviv but in the province. They have different branches in small cities and villages throughout the Eastern Galicia, and that's why gathering the peasants from the whole Eastern Galicia was quite an easy one for them. because of this wide network of this small branches of Sokol and Sich organizations. But we have quite a number of documents and materials which describe in this clash between the urban population and peasants who came to the city of Lemberg, because the main idea of the organizers was to show the Polish population of the city that the Ukrainians are could behave like a quite organized unit in the city, but still it was not true, because lots of the peasants from the Eastern Galicia were for the first time in the city, so it was quite unusual for them to march through the main streets of the city, and it was a challenge for the organizers to present the Ukrainians like the unity, and they tried to present them like a possible ground for the formation of the Ukrainian army. But still, most of the Ukrainian peasantry, which appeared themselves in the unusual situation of the urban space and urban landscape, look like a kind of carnival procession, not like a military troops in the city. And it was mentioned not with the Ukrainian press, of course, but which tried to depict it in the this event like a quite organized one, but it was noticed in the Polish press, which tried to show that Ukrainians have no right for the city because they don't know how to behave in the city space, and it was quite a big challenge for the organizers, and they tried to fix it because this was a critique in the first rally of 1911, and they tried to fix it and to make this event more organized in the 1914, but still they didn't manage to do this.
Thank you very much. The next one I saw is Rüde van Hengel.
Yeah, nothing special. I will nag a bit about some details, so please forgive me for that in advance. I just want to add to the remark of Sonia that Mehmet Basic has died, as far as I know, in 1941. So it would be a bit early to put his bones in the chapel already in 1932. That's the first detail. But interestingly, I also, as far as I know, his children had very Serbian names also, something like Dusan, Zoran, Vladimir. Yes, and oh, he's still alive. Yes, and well, maybe you know it better. I think they live somewhere in the Republika Srpska. Is it? Yes, and actually, I also heard that at some point they wanted to change the street name. That's why I wanted to refer to you in the Republika Srpska of the street of Mehmet Basic into something else because it was a Muslim. And then the children really objected to this, claiming that he was a true Serb actually. So I don't know if he Christianized himself, but he was some kind of Emir Kusturica avant la lettre, I think. So it's why I want to say this first. The claim that Mlada Bosna was Yugoslav can be. There are many arguments to that, but I think that Mehmet Basic was in it is not one of the best arguments. That's one, and two, I think this is just a nice contribution about memory culture in Bosnia. So that's it.
I think we can take this as an interesting contribution. Yeah.
I'm Gregor Meyer. I'm a journalist based in Belgrade and Budapest, and I have a question to Professor Donja. An observation from Belgrade and Zemun. There to see, since a certain time, large graffiti or wall painting depicting Gavrilo Princip. On the wall painting there is a text, a quote from an alleged poem he would have scribbled on his prison wall in Terezin, saying something like, our ghosts will wander through the imperial palace in Vienna and instill fear into the rulers. And then there's, like in a comic, a bubble in which he screams rebellion. How does this fit in your theory of celebrization? Isn't it a little more political, or is this also even an example for what you want to say.
Well, if you're asking about the issue of celebrity and that thesis, I had myself it took some time for me to get my mind around that idea. But now I think I understand that a celebrity designation, in a sense, allows for individualization of the interpretation. Everybody can have their own reading of him. There can be, therefore, multiple narratives. There can be dominant narratives and less common ones. And therefore, it is a facilitator of, let's say, pluralistic views of him. As far as this particular thing is concerned, I think my reading of the Princip part of Mlada Bosna was that it was first and foremost anti-Austrian, anti-imperial. And I think these people all had some probably good reason to resent and, in fact, hate the empire. That's number one. The way out of that for them was partly ideological, and as I said, I think in Princip's case, it was first and foremost Serbian, but with Yugoslavism there as an instrumentalized part of the ideology. But it was most of all what one could call the propaganda of the deed, the simple execution of the task, excuse the pun, to make a demonstrative statement to everyone else. And certainly that would fit in with my understanding of that. Thank you for the comment.
Ovako, ovo nije pitanje, ovo je svakako jedan ozbiljan ispravak za gospodina ovdje na ćošku koji sjedi kraj Elizabete. Ovako, bilo bi dobro da vodite računa prije nego generalizirate. Znači, rekli ste da su Vladimir, Zoran, Dušan srpska imena. Morate voditi računa o tome što su južnoslavenska imena. Dakle, Zoran, Vladimir su imena koje su podjednako zastupljene u srpskom, dakle, u srpskoj tradiciji, u hrvatskoj tradiciji podjednako. Znači, možete ih ponekad čak i Dušan naći i kod Slovenaca, a i kod Čeha. Morate paziti na to, dakle, da ako nađete negdje nekakvog Dušana, iz njega još i Zorana i Vladimira, da to ne budu nužno Srbi, jer ima Vladimira, dakle, i Rusa, pa će u nekoj drugoj situaciji biti samo Rusi, pa neće biti Ukrajinci. Znate, malo pripazite kod tih kvalifikacija. Hvala.
Ne možete po prezimenu ljude vrstiti kao... Samo mislim da nema mnogo muslima u Bosni koji su Dušan, ali ne kaže da to može...
I would also say that it is certainly Slavic, and we as non-Slavicists should keep that in mind, but as it is not a Bosniak name, and it is not a Muslim name, and it is not, and when you move as a child of that name to the Republika Srpska, it has probably some Serbian connotations within the family tradition. So there's a good number of indications for that argument. But to close the section, and I want to greatly thank to all the contributors, to all the papers we've heard and the speakers we've heard, rather not the papers, and to the four of you, and to you who contributed to the discussion. We have a short break only, as far as I see, 15 minutes, and we'll then gather in the great song. Near. We will meet here. Okay.
So next 10 minutes, I will ask you all to go out just to make some fresh air here.